I was going to follow up about someone who maybe wasn't a best friend or maybe wasn't a dad, but he was your manager. And that's obviously Percy Pringle, just that tie with The Undertaker. 3 years of your career, for on and off, I guess, he was by your side. Did you feel a level of pressure during that time, just given all the major names? I mean, even besides Taker that he worked with. And if you had to kind of pinpoint it in some way, what would you say was the biggest impact that he made on your career?
There's no pressure that I can recall feeling that much. Maybe at the very beginning when he first came in, maybe to, just impress or whatever.
Mhm.
But I feel like after the first couple times, especially back then, I'll say at that point, I was about maybe 7 or 8 years deep, maybe 7, 8, 9 years deep in the business at that point. And at that point, I had such a strange confidence in my abilities. I almost look back at it and I'm like, man, I wish I was as confident as that guy. Because at like 10 years deep, I was like, oh, there's nobody better. And so in a weird way, and maybe that was hubris in some way, but in some way I was just like, man, I was like, no, this is all hitting on right cylinders. And it felt like it was. And so for me, working with him and being with him, we had an amazing chemistry. It was just like we fed off of each other a lot. We always knew where the other one was going in a certain sense, if you get what I mean. And oh, good. Wow, that was quick. They are done already. See ya. So but anyway, but as far as like he was just really cool in the sense that like I didn't hit him up a lot for this because like I said, I'm hesitant to just like I don't want to bother people with stuff like this, but I might, I had asked him for little bits of advice here and there, whatever. Because there was a point in time. So okay, so a little quick story time.
Yeah.
2008, I had a great opportunity. I was brought in as an extra. Ended up getting slotted in a really good spot in a dark match. It was me in a tag match with like Gene Snitsky against Crime Time, which is unusual for them to do something like that.
Mhm.
And I was actually getting to get in, like it wasn't a squash. I got in a lot of offense, stuff like that. Got to get some heat, all that. And it was like, oh, cool, okay. And they wanted to bring me back the next week. Well, for one reason or another, my dumb ass showed up an hour late to the SmackDown the next week. And I got in a lot of heat for that. And they didn't want to talk to me for the next probably three years or so. And so I was just hitting him up like, man, I can't get a phone call. I can't get anybody to answer a phone, answer an email, nothing. And, I'd ask him for little bits of advice and stuff like that, whatever. And he was so grateful and so thankful for that advice. And he would always just sing my praises. And just like that, it's insane that you don't have a job, this, that, whatever. And just the fact that he was so, it was clear that not only was I not bothering him with it, but he was just so thankful for it. And I think part of that lends itself to a bit of the loneliness that he had. His wife had passed away, maybe a couple years prior to that. And I would always see his sad posts and whatnot. And I think that's why he actually kind of like let the condition that he had just kind of take him, because I think he was ready to go. So that was kind of sad to know about and find out about, because I didn't know about that until after everything had happened and he was gone. But as far as just him being around, man, he was a funny ass dude to have around. He was always cracking jokes, doing goofy stuff. People would be cutting promos and he's behind the camera doing stuff, pulling his ass out, things like that, just dumb stuff. So just a great guy to have around. But at the same time, he wasn't a guy who I could just be like, hey man, can you get me a job? And also I wouldn't ask that because like that's such a burden to put on somebody. Like,
Right.
hey, flex that muscle and get me in. Now, if he would have offered that, or if that was even something that he could have done, which I don't know, then okay, sure. But like to impose that on somebody, I don't know. It's just ain't my style.
So it was that tenuous of a situation where you're late for one show. And look, you're not assigned talent, right? So you should be on time. You should be early, most likely. I'm not here to criticize 2008 LA Night, but
no, there's a lot of stupid thoughts that go into it, and I could explain them, but it would take way too long.
okay. But I guess what I'm saying is, but it was that tenuous where, hey, you made that one mistake. And back then they're just like, hey, look, if he's not taking it seriously, we're not taking him seriously.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah. And part of it was that I had separated my shoulder maybe like three or so weeks before that. And so I was just walking around with all this pain. And so I kept trying to drive around and get checked out before I went in there, like little different clinics or whatever. I went to an emergency room, 3 hour wait. I said, screw that. I'm not going to do that. Went to another place and sat in there and waited for 45 minutes. Finally, they called me back. They're like, oh, our x-ray machine's down. I'm like, all right, forget it. I'm like, I'm just gonna go to the gym and try and get a pump on. Because if you're talking 2008, like it was big ass dudes back then. I mean, I think Batista was the champion back then.
Yeah.
Everybody was huge. So I'm like, I can't go in there flat. I need a pump when I go in. So I pull up to this place. There's a little physical therapy place next door. And I'm like, oh, okay, here's my last shot. I'm gonna go in and see. And the girl hooked me up with everything. She probably worked on me for like an hour or so. And it just ended up taking longer than it should have. And I think at this point it was like 1:30, call time's 2. And I'm like, I can't go in there flat. I don't think they'll notice if I come a little bit late. Well, they noticed. Yeah. And so when I showed up, I was just telling them, I was getting my shoulder checked out. They're like, well, wait, so you're injured? And I'm like, no, I'm not injured, but it's kind of like I'm trying to well, so if you're not injured, so I was painted into a corner as I should have been. It was a stupid decision on my part.
Yep.
And I recognize that. So that's one time where I shot myself in the foot, but 3 years of not picking up the phone is a heavy, heavy punishment.